What we're going to do today, and I've gotten some feedback from you guys, and I'll just let you guys know it's your first class. The fourth verbal class is the only one that I do this, where I ask for people's feedback. But I always make time in the fourth verbal class to be flexible about what we cover. I'm actually, if you've taken my, it's your first class, and you'll take all your sessions with me. But when you take my sessions, I cover all the material in the first 3 sessions, and then I save the last session for review. So that's what we're going to do. Today we're going to go over reading comp. We're going to work on reading comp, and we're going to work talking about reading comp, and then we're going to move on to sentence correction. So reading comp, this is a quick review. We'll spend more time on this, never fear. This is all new to you. Reading comp on test day, you'll see 3 to 5 questions, 3 to 5 passages with 3 to 5 questions per passage on a variety of topics, right? The topics are evenly distributed between social science, business writing, the humanities, and hard sciences. So you're equally likely to see any of these topics, but most people have the most difficulty with the hard sciences, so that's what we're going to work on today. As well as some social science and humanities writing, because sometimes that's the more complexly organized passage. So we're going to do some of both. And sorry, I'm trying to get my, you need to know, you should know that you should spend 4 to 5 minutes reading the passage and 1.5 minutes answering each question. For reading comprehension. And what we are going to really work on right now is reading the passage actively. Right? Most people, their biggest problem is really getting bogged down in the details of the reading comp passages, so that you feel like you have to read it 3 or 4 times to really understand what's going on. Right? That's the biggest problem most people have with reading comprehension, and that's what we're really going to work to avoid. We want to read the passage once before we go to start answering the questions, and we don't want to get bogged down in the details. We really want to glean the gist of the passage and the structure of the passage really efficiently through our first reading of the passage. So my first reading passage, I really want to glean the gist and the structure and the author's attitude from the passage. And I want to make sure I don't get bogged down in details, even if there are a lot of them and it seems difficult. So that's what we're going to work on doing today. You should know we're also going to create a passage map, i.e. we're going to take some brief notes on the passage. Why are we going to take some brief notes? Because it helps us to retain, writing the information helps us to retain information, right? So if I write it down, I'm more likely to remember it. And also the act of taking notes forces me to distill and paraphrase the information, right? If I know I have to take some notes about a paragraph and I know I don't want to take really long notes about the paragraph, I have to think about what's most important about the paragraph, right? And that's really our goal, is to think about what's most important about the paragraph. So taking notes is part of that process. We really focus our strategy on how we read the actual passage. And I also have some strategies for how to answer the actual questions, but those tend to be, that's a little less exciting, less groundbreaking. So we're going to do some difficult science passages, because most people seem to have the most difficulty with science passages. And we're going to do this passage. This is from the Maroon Official Guidebook. And what we're going to do is, I've done this before with people, but I think it's really good to do it again. We are going to read this passage together. I'm going to do some reading, and you're going to do some reading. And then we're going to take some brief notes on it. And we're going to try to distill what's most important. Okay. So let us start. Right? We're going to read the first paragraph and we're going to stop, right? And then we're going to think about what the most is important in that paragraph. So it was once believed that the brain was independent of metabolic processes occurring elsewhere in the body. Nothing that exciting. In recent studies, however, we discovered that the production and release in brain neurons of the neurotransmitter serotonin depend directly on the food that the body processes. Notice I just skipped this parenthetical, right? Because if it's parenthetical, it means it's not important. So I just didn't even read this. So then I asked myself, what was important here? What was important that I just read? So I'm going to take notes on that. What do you guys think? What was important about paragraph 1? Let me turn back to it so you can see it. What do we think the main idea of this passage is going to be? Tell me, chat me. Someone, anyone. What's the main idea of the passage? No one? Exactly. Something that was once believed as false. Exactly. And the brain, there's a relationship between brain chemistry and food. Exactly. We now think I'm just saying brain chemistry because I don't want to get all specific about what it's about. Brain, whatever, and food. Right, that was what was important in that paragraph. Nothing else in that paragraph was really that important. So that's pretty much all my notes for that paragraph. And then I'm going to continue reading. And now I'm going to, we'll do this together. Okay. So the second paragraph, right? Our first studies sought to determine whether the increase in serotonin observed in rats, blah, 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 given a large injection of the amino acid tryptophan, might also occur after rats ate meals that change tryptophan levels in the blood. Okay, so I know this is important because they're specifically referencing their first studies, so that's why I read the whole sentence and didn't just skim it. Whenever they specifically reference any specific source of information, is always important. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. Whenever any specific source of information is cited, even if it's something as basic as our first studies, it's always important. So I know that this sentence is important because a specific source of information is cited. Okay. So there was something about an injection of tryptophan might also occur after rats ate meals. So what are my notes going to be? Does food, tryptophan, work in body the same as injected tryptophan? Oh wait, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's what I've learned is important so far. And then I keep reading. Blah, blah, blah. These are the results, right? We found that immediately after the rats began to eat. Parallel elevations occurred in blood tryptophan, brain tryptophan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so brain chemistry changed. These findings suggested the production rates of serotonin, da, 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 da. I'm skimming because it's not important. In later studies. Okay, this is important. So these were just the results, right? So I'm thinking about this stuff as I read. These are just the results, right? And then the start talking about new studies here. So this is important. In later studies, we found that injecting insulin. Oh, so now they're injecting insulin. Okay, so we had the study, findings of it, new study, insulin. Right, we inject insulin, blah, blah, blah. So it's injected insulin, blah, blah, blah. We then decided to see whether the secretion of the animal's own insulin, blah, 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 blah. So we gave the rats a carbohydrate-containing meal that we knew would elicit insulin secretion. Okay, so they injected the insulin, and then they gave them a meal that would elicit insulin secretion. And then these are the results. Okay. So what is all this stuff I'm talking about? Why am I blah, blah, blahing as I read? Because I want to show you how I'm thinking as I'm reading. Right? I'm distilling and thinking about what I'm reading as I'm reading it. So I'm skipping what's not important and searching for what's important. So it's new study, insulin, right? But now I know it's injected insulin, right? And then insulin from food. Same result. Okay, so you guys are going to do this by yourselves in a moment, and I'm not going to talk so much. I just want to, this is to give you an example. Okay, then I go to the third paragraph. Right. Surprisingly, however, when we added a large amount of protein to the meal, brain, tryptophan, and serotonin levels fell. What's important so far in this paragraph? Introducing a new idea, which is protein. Right, we haven't talked about protein yet. And, of course, the word surprisingly, however, these are really important words. Right, so I'm going to keep reading. Since protein contains tryptophan, why should it depress brain? Oh my goodness, the author even asks the question. Right? So the fact that the author is asking a question means that this is really important. Again, notice I'm not really caring about exactly what the author is asking the question about, right? Because I don't need to understand everything about this paragraph the first time I read it. So surprising finding with protein, not what thought. Okay. I'm going to continue reading. I'm right here. The answer lies in the mechanism that provides blood tropha, the brain cells. I'm skimming. I don't really care. Same mechanism as the brain cells, EMAS, amino acids, tyrosine, lysine, consumption, Okay. More proportionally than it does a tryptophan. So I know it has to do with proportions of amino acids. And then I keep reading. The more protein is in the meal, the lower the ratio, blah, 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 the concentration of competing amino acids, and the more slowly tryptophan provided to the brain. All right. Thus, the more protein in the meal, the less serotonin produced and released. Okay, that's important. How do I know it's important? Because it starts with thus. And it's the last thing in the whole paragraph. Okay, so that is how I would read the passage and take notes. Because then when I'm answering the questions, I can go back and focus on the details that I skipped. But if I focus on the details the first time through, I'm just going to be overwhelmed with the amount of information. Okay, so I'm only looking for the important stuff the first time through. I'm forcing my brain to pick out what's important about the passage. Okay. So what we're going to do right now is actually we're not going to answer the questions on this passage, right? I think you should come back and do that for homework. But we're going to go ahead. No, I'm actually not going to read the passage two times. That's a really great question, though. Somebody just asked me if I read the passage twice, once skimming and then once for details, and I don't. The first time, notice I wasn't just skimming, right? There's some ideas that I got out of the passage really concretely, right? I know there's a relationship. I know what the whole passage is about, right? That it's about the relationship between brain chemistry and food. I know that's about, the serotonin and tryptophan, et cetera, and they injected it, and then they had the food, and then they injected insulin, and insulin from food, and same results, right? So there's some things I know really well about this passage. So what I don't know well is the details, but I don't need to know some details, right? I don't know which details they're going to ask me questions about. Right? They're going to ask me questions about some details and not about other details. So I'm going to wait until they ask me a question about a detail, and then I'm going to go and find out about that detail. Does that make sense? So then I'm only spending the time really investigating the ideas that I need to, and I'm not wasting my time understanding some archaic or arcane part of the passage that is irrelevant to any of the questions. For example, good, I like it. Let's look at a detailed question and how I would go back to understand a detail. So let's actually look at a couple. Let's look at number 85 here, right? According to the passage, one reason that the authors gave rats carbohydrates was to. Okay, well, I look at my notes. Right? I don't see carbohydrates written in my notes at all, right? But I know I'm going to look in paragraph 2 because this is where they did the studies with the food, right? So I'm going to skim paragraph 2 looking for the word carbohydrates. So I'm going to go back to my passage. So we'll go to paragraph 2, and I'm going to skim it looking for the word carbohydrates. Skim, skim, skim. Tell me when you guys, which line when you see it. Carbohydrates, carbohydrates. Line 25. Here it is, right? So I skimmed with the paragraph that I knew would contain information. I found it, and then I'm going to read that sentence, right? We gave the rats a carbohydrate-containing meal that we knew would elicit insulin secretion. Okay, I already know the answer to the question, right? They gave the carbohydrate meal to elicit insulin. I'm going to go back to the question, see if there's an answer choice that's similar. Right, I know it's not to depress the rat's tryptophan, prevent the rats from contracting disease, I don't know, cause the rats to produce insulin. Right, so it's that's an example of how I would go back and answer a specific question based on my notes, even though I skimmed it. Is that helpful to you, Jason? Okay. The only reason we're not doing a lot of these questions is just because I really want you guys to practice doing the passage on your own, right? Because I just did a whole lot of talking, and it's not necessarily the most helpful thing on the planet. Doing is usually more helpful than talking. So instead of spending a lot of time answering all these questions, I really want to jump right into having you guys take notes on the passage and read the passage for yourselves, and then we'll jump into talking about how to answer the questions.